Welcome to Frema Audiobooks. Before we begin, if you want to train your mind to think more clearly, stop being overwhelmed by problems, and develop a powerful solution-focused mindset, make sure to subscribe to Frema Audiobooks like this video. Share it with someone who needs a stronger mindset. And leave a comment below telling us one problem you are currently facing and what solution you are going to pursue first. Your support helps Frema Audiobooks reach more people around the world who are committed to personal growth, mental strength, productivity, success, and a better life. Now, let's begin. Every person faces problems. It does not matter how successful, wealthy, educated, talented, or experienced someone becomes. Problems are part of life. Businesses experience financial difficulties. Employees face workplace challenges. Entrepreneurs encounter failed ideas. Families experience disagreements. Investors experience losses. Students struggle with difficult subjects. Even the most successful people in history have faced uncertainty, rejection, failure, criticism, and unexpected obstacles. The difference between people who remain trapped by their circumstances and people who continue moving forward is often not the number of problems they face, but the way they think about those problems. Some people see a problem and immediately begin asking, "Why is this happening to me?" They focus on everything that went wrong, who is responsible, how unfair the situation feels, and how difficult the circumstances have become. They repeat the problem to themselves and to everyone around them until the problem becomes larger in their minds than it actually is. Other people look at exactly the same situation and ask a completely different question. What can I do about this? That question changes everything. It moves the mind away from helplessness and toward possibility. It does not magically remove the problem, but it changes the position from which you approach it. A solution-focused mindset does not mean pretending that problems do not exist. It does not mean ignoring pain, denying reality, or forcing yourself to be positive when something genuinely difficult is happening. It means acknowledging reality without becoming mentally trapped by it. You can recognize that a situation is difficult while still searching for the next useful action. You can admit that something went wrong while refusing to spend your entire day explaining why it went wrong. You can experience disappointment without allowing disappointment to become your identity. This is the difference between realistic thinking and destructive thinking. Think about the world's greatest entrepreneurs, scientists, engineers, doctors, investors, and leaders. Their careers are built around solving problems. They do not become successful because their lives contain fewer difficulties. They become successful because they develop the ability to look at difficult situations and search for possibilities hidden inside them. A business owner sees a customer complaint and asks how the product can improve. An engineer sees a technical failure and asks who caused it and how to redesign the system. An investor sees a market decline and asks whether the underlying fundamentals have changed. A leader sees a crisis and asks what decision will protect people and move the organization forward. Throughout this audiobook, we will explore how to train your mind to make this shift consistently. We will examine how to stop overthinking, separate facts from emotions, ask better questions, make decisions under pressure, turn failures into lessons, and develop the habit of searching for practical solutions instead of endlessly analyzing problems. You will learn that clear thinking is not simply an intellectual skill. It is a daily discipline. This audiobook is divided into 5 comprehensive parts. We will begin by understanding the difference between problem-focused thinking and solution-focused thinking. We will then learn how to control emotional reactions, simplify complex situations, make better decisions, and develop practical problem-solving habits. Finally, we will bring everything together and create a mindset that allows you to remain calm, focused, and constructive even when life becomes difficult. Remember this important principle from the beginning. You cannot always control what happens to you, but you can influence how you respond to what happens. You may not control the economy, other people's behavior, unexpected events, market conditions, or every circumstance surrounding you. But you can control your questions, your attention, your preparation, your actions, and your willingness to search for solutions. Now, let's begin with part 1, understanding the power of a solution-focused mindset. Before you can train your mind to focus on solutions, you must understand how your current thinking patterns influence the way you experience problems. Two people can face the same difficult situation and experience completely different outcomes because their minds focus on different things. One person sees only obstacles while another sees information. One sees failure while another sees feedback. One sees rejection while another sees an opportunity to improve. One asks why life is unfair, while another asks what can be done next. The circumstances may be identical, but the mental response creates a completely different path forward. In this first part, we will explore 3 foundational principles that will help you stop giving problems more mental power than they deserve, and begin training your mind to search for practical answers. Asterisk. Principle 1. Separate the problem from your identity. One of the most damaging mental habits is allowing a temporary problem to become a permanent definition of who you are. A person loses a job and begins thinking, "I am a failure." Someone's business struggles and starts believing, "I am not capable of succeeding." A relationship ends and the person concludes, "Nobody will ever love me." An investment loses money and the investor thinks, "I am terrible with money." Notice what happens in each situation. A specific event becomes a statement about personal identity. The problem is no longer simply something that happened. It becomes something the person believes they are. This creates an enormous psychological burden, because solving a problem is much easier than trying to repair an identity that has been damaged by it. Solution-focused thinkers learn to separate these two things. They say, "I lost my job," rather than, "I am a failure." They say, "My business is struggling," rather than, "I am a bad entrepreneur." They say, "This investment lost money," rather than, "I am incapable of making financial decisions." The first statements describe reality. The second statements attack identity. This distinction may appear small, but it completely changes the way the brain approaches difficulty. When the problem is externalized as a specific situation, the mind can analyze it, understand it, and work toward a solution. When the problem becomes part of identity, people often become defensive, hopeless, or emotionally paralyzed. Consider the journey of Steve Jobs, who experienced one of the most humiliating setbacks of his professional life when he was removed from the company he had helped create. Imagine what could have happened if he had interpreted that event as proof that he was permanently a failure. Instead, he continued developing ideas, learning, building new ventures, and eventually returned to Apple with additional experience and a broader perspective. The setback was real, painful, and consequential, but it did not become his identity. That distinction allowed him to continue creating. The same principle applies to everyday life. Imagine an employee receiving a poor performance review. The problem-focused mind may immediately begin replaying every criticism and thinking, "My career is finished." The solution-focused mind asks, which specific areas need improvement? Perhaps communication needs to become clearer. Perhaps technical skills need development. Perhaps deadlines need better organization. Once the problem is broken into specific areas, the employee can create a development plan. A vague identity judgment has been transformed into several concrete actions. This principle is especially important after failure. Failure can provide useful information, but only if you remain emotionally capable of examining it. If you immediately label yourself as incompetent, you stop analyzing what actually happened. You become focused on defending your self-esteem rather than learning from the experience. A solution-focused person protects their identity while remaining brutally honest about their mistakes. They can say, "I made a poor decision," without saying, "I am a poor decision maker." They can admit weakness without believing they are permanently weak. Whenever a problem appears, ask yourself, what happened exactly? Then ask, what part of this situation is within my control? This simple separation creates mental space. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are examining a situation. And once a situation can be examined objectively, it can often be improved. Principle 2. Replace "why is this happening?" with "what can I do next?" Questions determine the direction of your thinking. When something goes wrong, the human mind naturally asks questions such as, "Why me? Why does this always happen? Why are people treating me this way?" Or, "Why is everything so difficult?" These questions may feel natural, but they often lead to explanations rather than solutions. You can spend hours, days, or even years searching for reasons without becoming any closer to changing the situation. A solution-focused mind learns to recognize when a question is no longer productive and deliberately replaces it with a question that creates movement. This does not mean that understanding causes is unimportant. Sometimes you absolutely need to understand why something happened. A doctor needs to identify the cause of an illness. An engineer needs to determine why a machine failed. A business leader needs to understand why revenue declined. But there is a difference between investigating causes for the purpose of improvement and repeatedly asking why because you are emotionally frustrated. The first produces information. The second often produces rumination. Imagine an entrepreneur whose sales suddenly decline. The problem-focused approach may involve spending weeks complaining about the economy, competitors, customers, advertising platforms, and changing consumer behavior. Some of those factors may genuinely be responsible. But if the entrepreneur spends all their energy describing the problem, revenue will not automatically recover. A solution-focused entrepreneur asks additional questions. Which products are still selling? Which customers are remaining active? Can pricing be adjusted? Can the sales process improve? Should we enter a new market? What are successful competitors doing differently? These questions transform uncertainty into possible actions. A powerful real-life example can be found in the career of James Dyson. His development of successful vacuum technology involved thousands of prototypes and repeated failures. He could have interpreted every unsuccessful prototype as another reason to stop. Instead, each failure generated another question. What did this attempt teach me? That shift transformed failure from a dead end into information. Every unsuccessful design narrowed the possibilities and brought him closer to a workable solution. You can apply this principle to almost any problem. If you are struggling financially, instead of asking why money is always difficult, ask what expenses can be reduced, what skills can increase income, and what additional income sources could be developed. If your career feels stagnant, ask which skills would make you more valuable and which opportunities you should pursue. If your health habits are poor, ask which one habit you can change this week rather than becoming overwhelmed by everything that needs improvement. If a relationship is experiencing conflict, ask what conversation needs to happen and what behavior you can personally improve. The objective is not to force yourself to find an immediate answer to every problem. Some problems require time, research, expert advice, or patience. The objective is to keep your mind oriented toward constructive movement. Even when you cannot solve the entire problem today, you can usually identify one useful next step. That step creates momentum. And momentum is often what breaks the psychological paralysis created by overwhelming problems. Principle 3. Focus on what you can control. One of the greatest sources of unnecessary stress is spending mental energy on things you cannot control. You cannot control another person's opinion of you. You cannot control every economic event. You cannot control whether someone accepts your proposal. You cannot control the weather, market volatility, unexpected delays, or decisions made by people in positions of authority. Yet many people spend enormous amounts of mental energy attempting to predict, influence, or emotionally react to things completely outside their control. This creates frustration because the mind is constantly working on problems for which it has no direct solution. Solution-focused thinking begins by dividing circumstances into two categories: what you can influence and what you cannot. You may not control whether a customer buys your product, but you can improve the product and your sales process. You may not control whether you get a job offer, but you can improve your resume, skills, interview preparation, and number of applications. You may not control whether the market moves against your investment, but you can control position sizing, diversification, risk management, and your decision to follow a predetermined strategy. The philosophy of Viktor Frankl provides a powerful example of the importance of focusing on one's response, even under extreme circumstances. His experiences during the Holocaust demonstrated that human beings can retain an element of psychological choice even when external circumstances become extraordinarily restrictive. His work later emphasized the importance of meaning and the attitude a person adopts toward unavoidable suffering. While everyday problems are obviously not comparable to the circumstances he endured, the broader lesson remains powerful. Circumstances can limit your options without completely determining your response. Asterisk. Imagine waiting for an important business decision from someone else. You have already provided all the requested information, completed your preparation, and answered every question. Yet you spend the entire day checking your phone, worrying about what the other person might decide, and imagining negative outcomes. None of that changes the decision. A solution-focused approach would recognize that the decision is temporarily outside your control and redirect attention towards something useful. You could improve another part of the business, contact another potential client, study a valuable skill, or prepare for multiple possible outcomes. This does not mean becoming passive. Focusing on what you can control is actually a highly active mindset. It encourages responsibility. Instead of waiting for the world to become perfect, you ask what action is available right now. You stop demanding certainty before moving forward. You stop allowing someone else's behavior to determine your emotional state. You stop wasting hours mentally fighting circumstances that cannot be changed. A useful exercise is to create 3 categories. Whenever you face a difficult situation: what I can control, what I can influence, and what I must accept. The first category contains your actions and decisions. The second includes things where communication, negotiation, preparation, or leadership may create influence. The third includes realities that cannot currently be changed. This simple framework can immediately reduce mental noise because it tells your brain where effort belongs. The first 3 principles establish the foundation of solution-focused thinking. Separate the problem from your identity so that failure does not destroy your self-belief. Replace unproductive questions with questions that create movement. Finally, focus your energy on what you can control instead of exhausting yourself fighting circumstances you cannot change. These principles do not eliminate problems from life, but they dramatically improve your ability to respond to them. Asterisk now. Let's move on to part 2. Training your mind to think clearly under pressure when life is calm. Almost everyone believes they are capable of thinking rationally. The real test comes when pressure arrives. A difficult conversation, unexpected financial loss, business crisis, career setback, family conflict, or major decision can immediately change the way the mind operates. Under pressure, people often stop looking for solutions and begin reacting emotionally. They exaggerate consequences, assume the worst, make decisions too quickly, or become completely paralyzed because the situation feels overwhelming. Clear thinking under pressure is therefore not simply a natural personality trait. It is a skill that can be trained. The more you practice separating facts from emotions, breaking large problems into smaller pieces, and slowing down your reactions, the easier it becomes to remain constructive when circumstances become difficult. In this part, we will explore 3 principles that can help you maintain clarity when other people are losing theirs. Principle 4. Separate facts from assumptions. One of the most important skills in clear thinking is learning to distinguish what you actually know from what you merely believe might be true. When something goes wrong, the mind often fills gaps in information with assumptions. A manager does not respond to your message, and you assume they are angry. A client stops replying, and you assume they no longer want your service. Your investment declines, and you assume the entire market is about to collapse. A friend cancels a meeting, and you assume they no longer value the relationship. In each situation, the facts may be very different from the story your mind creates. Solution-focused thinking begins by separating reality from interpretation. Imagine receiving an email from your employer saying, "We need to discuss your recent performance." The facts are simple. Your employer wants to have a discussion. Everything else is an assumption. You may believe you are about to be fired, that your career is in danger, or that management has lost confidence in you. But none of those conclusions are confirmed yet. If you allow assumptions to become facts inside your mind, anxiety grows rapidly. If you remain focused on what is actually known, you can prepare calmly for the conversation and respond intelligently to whatever information emerges. This principle is particularly valuable in business and investing. Markets constantly produce information that can trigger emotional reactions. A stock price falls sharply, and investors immediately create explanations about what will happen next. A competitor announces a new product, and business owners assume their company is doomed. A customer complains, and an entrepreneur concludes that everyone must be unhappy. Strong decision-makers resist this automatic reaction. They gather evidence, compare multiple explanations, and avoid making major decisions based on incomplete information. Consider the approach of Ray Dalio, who built much of his investment philosophy around understanding reality objectively and identifying the principles behind changing circumstances. One of the most valuable lessons from his approach is the importance of confronting reality rather than allowing personal preferences to distort it. When facts challenge your assumptions, the solution-focused thinker changes the assumptions instead of trying to force reality to match them. A practical technique is to divide a page into 2 sections whenever you face a difficult situation. On one side, write "I know." On the other, write "what I am assuming." You may be surprised by how much of your anxiety belongs in the second column. Once assumptions become visible, you can investigate them rather than automatically believing them. This simple habit can prevent unnecessary arguments, impulsive financial decisions, and emotional reactions that create problems larger than the original situation. Principle 5. Break overwhelming problems into smaller problems. Large problems often feel impossible because the brain tries to solve everything simultaneously. Imagine looking at a business that is losing money, carrying debt, struggling with employees, experiencing declining sales, and facing increased competition. If you think about all 5 problems at once, the situation may feel overwhelming. You may conclude that the business is beyond repair before investigating any specific issue. Solution-focused thinkers reduce complexity by breaking large problems into smaller, manageable components. Instead of asking, "How do I fix everything?" they ask, "What is the first problem I need to solve?" This approach has been used across science, engineering, medicine, military planning, and business because complex systems become easier to manage when divided into smaller components. An engineer does not attempt to repair an entire aircraft without identifying the specific malfunction. A doctor does not treat every symptom simultaneously without determining which condition is responsible. A business leader does not necessarily need to solve every organizational issue at once. The key is identifying the highest impact problem and addressing it first. Imagine someone facing serious financial pressure. They may have credit card debt, a large monthly rent payment, unnecessary subscriptions, inconsistent income, and insufficient savings. Looking at the entire situation can create panic. Instead, they can divide it into categories. First, determine essential monthly expenses. Second, identify high-interest debt. Third, eliminate unnecessary recurring expenses. Fourth, explore ways to increase income. Fifth, establish an emergency savings target. Suddenly, the situation becomes a series of decisions rather than one enormous crisis. The career of Elon Musk provides a well-known example of thinking through complex problems by breaking them into fundamental components. His approach to first principles reasoning involves questioning assumptions and reducing problems to basic truths before rebuilding solutions from those foundations. While not every problem requires such an extreme approach, the underlying idea is highly useful. When a problem seems complicated, identify what is actually necessary, what is merely assumed, and which component is creating the greatest difficulty. The same strategy can be applied to personal development. If someone says, "My whole life is disorganized," that statement is too broad to solve. Instead, identify specific areas. Sleep may be inconsistent. Finances may be disorganized. The home may be cluttered. Work may lack structure. Exercise may be neglected. Relationships may require attention. Once these categories are separated, each one can receive an appropriate solution. The mind becomes calmer because the problem is no longer an undefined mountain. It becomes a series of smaller hills that can be climbed one at a time. Breaking problems down also creates psychological momentum. Every small problem solved provides evidence that progress is possible. That progress creates confidence, and confidence encourages further action. Even when the larger situation remains difficult, you no longer feel completely powerless because you can see movement. The goal is not to solve everything immediately. The goal is to keep moving from one manageable problem to the next until the larger situation begins improving. Principle 6. Slow down before making important decisions. When people feel pressure, they often believe they need to act immediately. Sometimes immediate action is necessary, especially in genuine emergencies. But many decisions become worse when made in a state of emotional urgency. Fear creates the desire to escape. Anger creates the desire to retaliate. Excitement creates the desire to act before thinking. Anxiety creates the desire to obtain certainty immediately. Solution-focused thinkers learn that a short pause can prevent a long-term mistake. Consider an investor who sees a market suddenly decline. Fear immediately suggests selling everything. If the investor acts within seconds, without reviewing the original investment thesis, risk tolerance, or broader market conditions, a temporary market movement may turn into a permanent loss. A disciplined investor pauses, reviews the facts, examines the reason for the decline, and determines whether anything fundamental has changed. The pause does not guarantee a correct decision, but it creates a better environment for rational thinking. The same principle applies to personal conflict. Imagine receiving an angry message from someone you care about. Your first reaction may be to respond immediately with an equally emotional message. That response might feel satisfying for 30 seconds, but create consequences that last for months. A more solution-focused approach is to pause, read the message again later, separate the facts from the emotional language, and decide what outcome you actually want from the conversation. Sometimes the best response is not the fastest response. Successful leaders often develop deliberate decision-making routines for this reason. They know that important decisions deserve more attention than minor decisions. They may sleep on major choices, consult trusted advisors, gather additional information, or write down possible outcomes before committing. This does not mean becoming indecisive. It means matching the speed of the decision to the importance of the consequences. A simple rule can help. Never make a permanent decision based entirely on a temporary emotion. Anger passes. Fear changes. Excitement fades. Disappointment becomes easier to process with time. When the emotional intensity decreases, your perspective often becomes clearer. Give yourself enough space to allow that clarity to appear whenever circumstances permit. This principle is particularly powerful when combined with the previous two. First, separate facts from assumptions. Second, break the problem into smaller parts. Third, slow down long enough to decide which action actually deserves to be taken. This sequence transforms emotional reaction into structured problem solving. Instead of allowing pressure to control your decisions, you create a process that protects your judgment. The second group of principles teaches us how to remain mentally clear when circumstances become difficult. Separate facts from assumptions so that fear does not create imaginary realities. Break large problems into smaller components so that complexity becomes manageable. Slow down before major decisions so that temporary emotions do not create permanent consequences. These habits can dramatically improve your judgment in business, finances, relationships, careers, and everyday life. Now, let's move on to part 3, turning problems into opportunities for growth. Asterisk, a problem can be a wall, or it can be a teacher. The difference often depends on the mindset you bring to the situation. When something goes wrong, most people naturally focus on the immediate pain. They see the missed opportunity, the financial loss, the rejection, the criticism, the broken plan, or the unexpected obstacle. That reaction is understandable because problems are uncomfortable. But if you train your mind to look deeper, almost every difficult experience contains information that can make you stronger, wiser, and better prepared for the future. A failed business can reveal weaknesses in strategy. A rejected application can reveal skills that need improvement. A financial mistake can expose poor habits. A difficult relationship can teach you about communication and boundaries. The objective is not to pretend that painful experiences are good. The objective is to refuse to waste the lessons hidden inside them. Principle 7. Ask what the problem is trying to teach you when something goes wrong. One of the most powerful questions you can ask is, what can I learn from this? This question changes the position of the mind immediately. Instead of remaining focused on blame, disappointment, or regret, you begin searching for information. You become an investigator rather than a victim. You examine what happened, identify patterns, and look for lessons that can prevent the same mistake from happening again. This does not mean every problem has a simple lesson or that every painful experience happens for a specific reason. It simply means that you can choose to extract useful knowledge from experiences that you cannot change. Consider an entrepreneur whose first business fails after several years of effort. The emotional temptation is to conclude that the entire experience was wasted. But imagine the entrepreneur carefully reviewing what happened. Perhaps the business had weak cash flow management. Perhaps the product solved the problem that customers did not consider important enough. Perhaps marketing costs were too high. Perhaps the entrepreneur expanded too quickly. Each discovery becomes valuable knowledge. If the entrepreneur launches another business later, those lessons can prevent expensive mistakes. The first business failed, but the knowledge gained from it can contribute to the success of the second. This philosophy can be seen in the career of Michael Jordan. His career included failures, missed shots, lost games, and moments of disappointment. Yet those experiences became part of the development of one of the most competitive athletes in history. His story is often used to illustrate the idea that failure can become fuel for improvement. The important lesson is not that failure automatically produces success. Failure becomes useful only when you analyze it, learn from it, and use the information to change your future behavior. Imagine receiving critical feedback from your manager. Your first reaction might be defensiveness because criticism can feel like a personal attack. But instead of asking, "Why are they criticizing me?" ask, "Is there anything useful here?" Perhaps the feedback is poorly delivered, but there may still be one important point about communication, organization, leadership, or technical performance. You do not need to accept every criticism as truth. You simply need to remain open enough to discover whether any part of it can help you improve. This mindset also prevents repeated mistakes. People often repeat problems because they focus on escaping the immediate discomfort rather than understanding the underlying cause. If you repeatedly experience financial shortages but never examine spending habits, the same problem will return. If you repeatedly miss deadlines but never analyze your planning process, the pattern continues. If you repeatedly enter unhealthy relationships but never examine boundaries and personal choices, the cycle may repeat. Asking what a problem is teaching you creates the possibility of breaking those patterns. Principle 8. Look for opportunities hidden inside disruption. Difficult circumstances often create opportunities that are invisible at first. Economic changes create new industries. Technological disruptions create new businesses. Consumer problems create new products. Personal setbacks can reveal new careers. Unexpected challenges can force people to develop skills they never would have learned otherwise. Solution-focused thinkers train themselves to look beyond the immediate disruption and ask, what has changed, and what new possibilities exist because of that change? The global transformation toward digital work provides a powerful example. When circumstances forced millions of people and organizations to change how they worked, many businesses struggled initially. But the disruption also accelerated technologies and services that supported remote collaboration, digital communication, online education, cloud computing, and electronic commerce. Entrepreneurs who recognized these changes were able to build solutions around new needs. The disruption was real, but so were the opportunities created by the new environment. Consider someone who loses a traditional job because an industry is changing. The immediate reaction may be fear and frustration. But after the initial shock, the person might ask what skills are becoming more valuable in the new economy. Perhaps digital marketing, data analysis, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, project management, or specialized technical skills are increasingly demanded. Instead of spending months trying to recreate the past, the individual can begin preparing for the future. The problem becomes a signal that adaptation is necessary. The story of Jeff Bezos offers another interesting example of recognizing changing consumer behavior. Amazon began as an online bookstore at a time when internet commerce was still developing. The opportunity was not obvious to everyone, but Bezos recognized the potential of the internet to transform retail. Over time, the company expanded far beyond books and built services around changing consumer needs. The lesson is not that every disruption creates a billion-dollar opportunity. The lesson is that major changes often reward people who pay attention rather than simply resist them. You can apply this principle to your own life. If your company changes its structure, ask what new skills might become valuable. If technology threatens to replace part of your current work, ask what higher-level skills you can develop that technology cannot easily replace. If a customer complains repeatedly, ask whether the complaint reveals an unmet need that could become a new product. If a personal setback forces you to reconsider your direction, Ask whether there is another path that better aligns with your abilities and values. Opportunity-focused thinking does not require optimism without evidence. It requires curiosity. You are not pretending that disruption is painless. You are simply refusing to assume that the first negative consequence is the only consequence. Change creates winners and losers, but it also creates possibilities for people who are prepared to adapt. Principle 9. Turn obstacles into systems and processes. 1. Of the most powerful ways to solve recurring problems is to stop relying entirely on willpower and create systems that prevent the problem from repeatedly occurring. If you constantly forget appointments, use a reliable calendar system. If you repeatedly overspend, automate savings and create spending limits. If employees frequently make the same mistake, improve the process and documentation. If you regularly miss deadlines, establish milestones and reminders. A solution-focused mind does not simply solve today's problem. It asks how to prevent the same problem from consuming time tomorrow. Consider a business owner who notices that customers repeatedly receive orders later than promised. The owner could spend every afternoon personally checking individual orders and apologizing to customers. That may solve today's problems, but it does not solve the underlying system. A better approach would be to examine the entire fulfillment process. Where are delays occurring? Is inventory information inaccurate? Are orders being entered incorrectly? Is the shipping process inefficient? Once the root cause is identified, the business can create a system that reduces future delays. This approach is one reason successful organizations invest heavily in processes. They understand that relying on memory, individual heroics, and constant emergency intervention is inefficient. Systems allow good decisions to happen repeatedly without requiring extraordinary effort every time. The same principle can transform personal life. Instead of repeatedly trying to motivate yourself to save money, automate the transfer. Instead of repeatedly deciding whether to exercise, schedule it at a fixed time. Instead of constantly remembering important tasks, use a trusted system. The philosophy of continuous improvement associated with Japanese business practices, including the concept of Kaizen, demonstrates the power of making small systematic improvements over time. A process does not need to be completely redesigned every week. Small improvements can eventually create enormous gains when repeated consistently. This mindset changes the question from, how do I solve this problem today, to how can I build a system that makes this problem less likely to occur tomorrow. Imagine a person who repeatedly wakes up late and arrives at work stressed. They could continue blaming themselves for lacking discipline, or they could redesign the system. Prepare clothes the night before. Set the alarm away from the bed. Establish a consistent bedtime. Prepare breakfast in advance. Create a morning checklist. The problem may not require greater motivation. It may require better design. This is one of the deepest principles of solution-focused thinking. Whenever the same problem appears repeatedly, stop treating it as an isolated event. Look for the system producing it. Ask what process, habit, environment, communication pattern, or decision rule needs to change. Once the system improves, the problem often becomes much easier to manage. The third group of principles teaches us to transform difficulty into progress. Ask what every problem can teach you. Look for opportunities hidden inside disruption, rather than assuming change is purely negative. Finally, turn recurring obstacles into systems that prevent them from repeatedly consuming your time and energy. These habits allow problems to become sources of knowledge, adaptation, and long-term improvement. Now, let's move on to part 4, making better decisions and taking effective action. *A. Solution-focused mindset is valuable only when it eventually leads to action. You can analyze a problem for hours, identify dozens of possibilities, and understand every detail of a situation. But if you never make a decision and never act, nothing changes. Many people become trapped in what appears to be thoughtful thinking, but is actually overthinking. They keep searching for more information because they are afraid of making the wrong choice. They compare endless alternatives, imagine every possible negative outcome, and wait for certainty that may never arrive. Clear thinkers understand that good decisions rarely come from having perfect information. They come from gathering enough relevant information, evaluating most important factors, accepting reasonable uncertainty, and then taking action. In this part, we will explore 3 principles that will help you move from analysis to execution and become more effective when solving real problems. Principle 10. Make decisions based on priorities, not emotions. Every problem contains many possible actions, but not every action deserves the same level of attention. When people become overwhelmed, they often react to whichever issue creates the strongest emotional response rather than whichever issue has the greatest practical importance. A small complaint may receive more attention than a major financial risk simply because the complaint feels more urgent. An angry email may consume an entire afternoon while an important strategic decision remains untouched. Solution-focused thinkers learn to distinguish emotional urgency from actual importance. They ask which problem, if solved, would create the greatest improvement in the situation. Imagine a business owner facing declining revenue. At the same time, an employee complains about a minor scheduling issue. A customer leaves a negative review, and an important sales pipeline has weakened. The negative review may create the strongest emotional reaction, but spending 3 hours responding to it may not solve the underlying financial problem. A better approach is to identify the largest drivers of declining revenue and prioritize those first. The negative review can still be addressed, but it should not automatically become the most important task simply because it feels uncomfortable. This principle is closely related to the way successful leaders manage limited resources. They understand that time, money, attention, and energy are finite. Every hour spent solving one problem is an hour that cannot be spent solving another. Every dollar invested in one area cannot be invested somewhere else. Therefore, good decision-making requires prioritization. The question is not simply, what needs attention? Almost everything may need attention. The better question is, what deserves attention first? Consider the approach of Jeff Bezos, who built a business around prioritizing long-term customer value and making strategic decisions that supported that priority. Whether you are managing a multinational company or your own personal life, clarity about priorities simplifies decisions. When you know what matters most, many choices become easier because you can evaluate them against your central objectives. A useful method is to ask 3 questions whenever you face multiple problems. First, what will happen if I do nothing? Second, which problem is creating the greatest long-term damage? Third, which action could create the greatest positive impact? These questions prevent you from automatically choosing the easiest task or the one that generates the strongest emotional reaction. They force you to consider consequences and impact. This approach is particularly important during stressful periods because stress narrows attention. You may feel pressure to solve everything immediately, but attempting to do so can actually make your performance worse. Choose the most important issue, address it properly, then move to the next. Progress becomes more manageable when priorities determine action rather than emotions. Principle 11. Use the simplest effective solution. People often assume that complicated problems require complicated solutions. Sometimes they do, but many problems become more difficult because we create unnecessary complexity around them. We add too many steps, too many tools, too many meetings, too many rules, and too many variables. Eventually, the solution becomes harder to maintain than the original problem. Solution-focused thinkers constantly search for the 5D Simplest action that can effectively address the situation without creating additional unnecessary complications. Imagine a small business struggling with communication. The owner may respond by purchasing 5 different productivity applications, creating multiple communication channels, scheduling daily meetings, and requiring employees to complete complicated reports. The intention is improvement, but the result may be greater confusion. A simpler solution might be to establish one central communication platform, one weekly planning meeting, clear responsibilities, and a simple reporting process. The goal is not to use the most sophisticated system. The goal is to create a system people can actually follow. The principle of simplicity has been demonstrated repeatedly in technology and product design. Products that require unnecessary instructions, complicated interfaces, or excessive steps often frustrate users. Great design frequently removes complexity rather than adding features. The same philosophy can be applied to personal problem solving. Before adding another solution, ask whether something can be removed. Before creating another process, ask whether an existing process can be simplified. Before purchasing another tool, ask whether the tools you already have are being used effectively. Consider someone trying to improve their finances. They may download several budgeting applications, create dozens of categories, track every tiny transaction, and build complicated spreadsheets. If the system becomes too difficult, they may abandon it completely. A simpler approach could be to automate savings, monitor a few major expense categories, review finances once a week, and set clear spending limits. The simpler system may produce better results because it is sustainable. The same applies to health. Someone who wants to become healthier may attempt a completely restrictive diet, exercise twice a day, eliminate every enjoyable food, track dozens of metrics, and follow an extremely complicated schedule. After several weeks, the system becomes exhausting and disappears. A simpler approach might involve walking daily, strength training several times per week, eating more whole foods, improving sleep, and reducing unnecessary processed foods. It may not sound revolutionary, but simple systems are often easier to maintain. This principle does not mean choosing the easiest solution regardless of effectiveness. The goal is the simplest effective solution. If a complicated process genuinely creates better results and the complexity is necessary, keep it. But never assume complexity equals quality. Always ask whether the same outcome can be achieved with fewer steps, fewer resources, fewer decisions, and less unnecessary effort. Principle 12. Take the next useful action instead of waiting for the perfect plan. One of the greatest obstacles to solving problems is waiting for perfect certainty. People want to know exactly what will happen before they act. They want the perfect business strategy, the perfect career decision, the perfect investment opportunity, the perfect fitness program, or the perfect answer. Unfortunately, life rarely provides that level of certainty. Information changes. Circumstances evolve. People behave unpredictably. Markets move unexpectedly. New opportunities appear. A plan that looks perfect today may become outdated tomorrow. Solution-focused thinkers therefore understand the difference between planning carefully and waiting endlessly. Imagine someone who wants to start a business, but spends 2 years researching every possible industry, competitor, marketing strategy, pricing model, and technology before launching anything. Another person conducts reasonable research, identifies a promising opportunity, launches a small version of the product, receives feedback, and improves it. The second person is learning from reality rather than attempting to predict everything from a distance. Each customer interaction provides information that no amount of theoretical planning could completely reproduce. This is one reason experimentation is so powerful. Instead of asking, "How can I guarantee this will work?" ask, "What small experiment can I run to learn whether this works?" This changes the decision from a massive, irreversible commitment into a manageable test. Businesses can test products. Entrepreneurs can test markets. Professionals can test new career directions through courses or projects. Content creators can test different formats. Individuals can test new routines before permanently changing their lifestyle. Consider the early development of Sarah Blakely. Her journey demonstrates the importance of taking action despite uncertainty and rejection. She developed an idea, pursued it despite obstacles, and continued learning through the process rather than waiting for universal approval. The broader lesson is that many successful ventures begin with incomplete information and develop through action, feedback, and persistence. This principle is also useful when dealing with personal problems. If you are uncertain whether a new routine will improve your productivity, test it for 2 weeks. If you believe reducing certain expenses will improve your finances, implement the change for a month and evaluate the result. If you think a new skill could improve your career, begin learning it and observe how it affects your opportunities. You do not need to know everything before beginning. You need enough information to take the next intelligent step. Taking action does not mean acting recklessly. There's a significant difference between thoughtful action and impulsive action. Thoughtful action considers risks, gathers relevant information, and begins with a reasonable step. Impulsive action ignores consequences and moves simply to escape discomfort. The goal is to become someone who can make informed decisions without requiring perfect certainty. When you consistently take the next useful action, problems become less intimidating because you develop a habit of movement. Instead of standing in front of an enormous challenge asking how you will solve everything, you identify the next step. Then the next. Then the next. Eventually, what once seemed impossible begins becoming manageable. The fourth group of principles teaches us how to transform thinking into results. Prioritize problems according to impact rather than emotional intensity. Search for the simplest effective solution rather than creating unnecessary complexity. Finally, take the next useful action instead of waiting for perfect certainty. These principles turn a solution-focused mindset into practical behavior. Now, let's move on to part 5, becoming a person who naturally searches for solutions. We have reached the final part of this audiobook. But the most important transformation is still ahead of you. The objective of everything we have discussed is not simply to teach you how to solve one difficult problem. It is to change the way you approach problems for the rest of your life. Problems will continue to appear. Some will be financial. Some will be professional. Some will involve relationships, health, business, family, technology, or unexpected circumstances that you could never have predicted. You will not always have control over what happens, and you will not always immediately know what to do. But you can train yourself to become the person who remains calm, asks better questions, separates facts from assumptions, focuses on what can be controlled, learns from failure, simplifies complexity, and takes constructive action. That identity is far more valuable than any individual solution because it gives you a method for facing uncertainty again and again. Principle 13. Train yourself to search for possibilities before limitations. The human mind has a natural tendency to identify threats and limitations quickly. This ability can protect us from danger, but it can also become destructive when it dominates everyday thinking. Someone sees a new business opportunity and immediately thinks about all the ways it could fail. Someone receives an invitation to apply for a prestigious position and immediately assumes they are not qualified. Someone considers moving to another country and focuses exclusively on everything that could go wrong. Someone wants to start investing but becomes so focused on possible losses that they never learn how to manage risk intelligently. Solution-focused thinking does not ignore limitations, but it deliberately asks what is possible before deciding what is impossible. Imagine an employee who believes they deserve a promotion, but assumes management will never recognize their abilities. Instead of accepting that conclusion, they could ask what evidence would demonstrate readiness for the next position. Perhaps they need stronger leadership experience, better communication, a professional certification, or measurable results. Suddenly, the limitation becomes a development plan. The person has moved from, "I cannot get promoted," to "Here are the things I can improve to increase my chances." That is the power of possibility-focused thinking. The history of innovation is filled with people who refuse to accept existing limitations permanent. Elon Musk repeatedly entered industries that many people considered extremely difficult, including electric vehicles and commercial space technology. His approach was not based on believing that every ambitious idea would succeed. It involved questioning assumptions, studying fundamental constraints, and asking whether supposedly impossible problems could be approached differently. The lesson for everyday life is not to blindly believe that everything is possible. It is to investigate limitations rather than automatically accepting them. When a problem appears, train yourself to ask 3 questions. What possibilities still exist? What resources do I already have? What could I learn or change that would improve the situation? These questions force the brain to search for options. Even if the final answer is not immediately available, the act of searching creates movement. You become less focused on the size of the obstacle and more focused on the possibilities surrounding it. Principle 14. Become emotionally disciplined instead of emotionally controlled. A clear mind does not mean having no emotions. Emotions are valuable sources of information, but they are not always reliable decision makers. Anger can tell you that something matters, but it does not necessarily tell you what action to take. Fear can warn you about risk, but it can also exaggerate danger. Excitement can create energy, but it can encourage impulsive decisions. Sadness can reveal that something important has been lost, but it does not mean your future is permanently damaged. Solution-focused people learn to acknowledge emotions, without allowing emotions to control every decision. Imagine a trader experiencing several consecutive losses. Frustration begins building, and the temptation is to increase position size in an attempt to recover the money quickly. Emotion says, take a bigger risk and get it back. Discipline says, review the strategy, protect the remaining capital, and wait for a high-quality opportunity. The second response may feel less satisfying in the moment, but it protects the future. Emotional discipline means allowing feelings to exist without giving them authority over your decisions. The same principle applies to business and relationships. If a customer insults you, responding with anger may damage the relationship permanently. If an employee makes a mistake, reacting aggressively may create fear rather than improvement. If someone criticizes your work, immediately defending yourself may prevent you from hearing valuable information. Taking a pause allows emotion to settle enough for judgment to return. This is one reason calm people often appear powerful during difficult situations. They are not necessarily less emotional than everyone else. They have simply learned to create space between feeling and action. That space is where intelligent decisions are made. You can develop this ability through simple habits. Pause before responding. Take several slow breaths, write down your thoughts. Postpone major decisions when emotions are extremely intense. And ask yourself what outcome you actually want before taking action. Principle 15. Build a habit of asking better questions. The quality of your questions often determines the quality of your thinking. If you ask, why does everything always go wrong for me? Your mind searches for evidence that life is unfair. If you ask, what is within my control? Your mind searches for actions. If you ask, who is responsible for this? Your mind may search for someone to blame. If you ask, what can I do differently next time? Your mind searches for improvement. The question itself directs attention toward a particular type of answer. Great problem solvers, therefore, become excellent question askers. They do not immediately accept the first version of a problem. They investigate it. They ask what is actually happening, what evidence exists, what assumptions are being made, what has already been tried, what resources are available, what constraints are real, and what outcome is desired. This process often reveals that the original problem was misunderstood. Imagine a business owner saying, "We need more customers." A solution-focused thinker may ask, "Do we actually need more customers, or do we need more profitable customers?" Perhaps the company already has enough customers, but poor pricing. Another question could be, why are existing customers not purchasing again? The answer might reveal a retention problem rather than an acquisition problem. Better questions can completely change the solution. The scientific method demonstrates the power of questioning. Scientists do not simply accept the first explanation for an observation. They form hypotheses, test them, collect evidence, revise their understanding, and continue investigating. You can apply the same mindset to personal decisions. Instead of assuming you know why something happened, investigate. Instead of accepting a limitation, question it. Instead of assuming a solution failed, ask whether it was implemented correctly. Asterisk principle. 16. Build resilience by expecting obstacles. Many people become discouraged by problems because they believe successful progress should be smooth. They imagine that if a goal is truly right for them, everything should eventually fall into place. When obstacles appear, they interpret them as evidence that they are on the wrong path. Experienced problem solvers understand something different. Obstacles are part of the process. They prepare mentally for delays, mistakes, rejection, unexpected expenses, changing circumstances, and periods of uncertainty. This preparation does not make problems enjoyable, but it prevents surprise from turning into panic. Consider an entrepreneur launching a new product. Instead of assuming everything will work perfectly, they create contingency plans. What happens if sales are slower than expected? What happens if a supplier fails? What happens if advertising costs increase? What happens if customers request changes? By considering these possibilities in advance, the entrepreneur becomes more adaptable when problems occur. The same approach can be applied personally. If you are trying to improve your finances, expect unexpected expenses and create an emergency reserve. If you are pursuing a career change, expect rejection and continue developing skills while applying for opportunities. If you are building a business, expect some ideas to fail and maintain enough flexibility to test alternatives. If you are improving your health, expect occasional setbacks and avoid treating one bad day as the end of the journey. Resilience does not mean believing that nothing will go wrong. It means knowing that something will eventually go wrong and trusting yourself to respond. That confidence changes the emotional experience of uncertainty. Instead of thinking, "What if something goes wrong?" you begin thinking, "If something goes wrong, I will deal with it." Principle 17. Become the person others trust when problems appear. One of the highest levels of solution-focused thinking is becoming a person whom others naturally turn to during difficult situations. When everyone else is complaining, you remain calm. When people are blaming one another, you search for facts. When confusion increases, you create structure. When fear spreads, you identify the next step. When a mistake happens, you focus on correction rather than humiliation. This type of person becomes valuable in every environment because organizations, families, and communities always need individuals who can remain constructive under pressure. Think about great leaders during crises. Their value is not demonstrated when everything is easy. It is demonstrated when circumstances become uncertain. People look to them for clarity, honesty, direction, and emotional stability. A leader who panics during every problem spreads panic throughout the organization. A leader who remains calm and communicates clearly creates confidence even when the final outcome is uncertain. You can develop this reputation through small actions. When someone brings you a problem, do not immediately criticize them. Ask questions. Understand the situation. Help identify possible options. When you make a mistake, acknowledge it quickly and propose a solution. When someone else makes a mistake, focus on how the situation can be corrected and how the process can be improved. Over time, people begin associating you with solutions rather than complaints. This reputation can become incredibly valuable professionally. Managers notice employees who solve problems without constantly requiring supervision. Clients remember professionals who remain helpful during difficult situations. Entrepreneurs attract talented people when they create environments where challenges are handled constructively. Even in personal relationships, people appreciate those who bring calmness and practical thinking during stressful moments. Now let's move on to the final conclusion. Train your mind to see solutions. After everything we have explored, the central message of this audiobook can be reduced to one powerful idea. Problems are unavoidable, but helplessness is not. You will experience situations you did not choose. People will disappoint you. Plans will fail. Money will sometimes become tight. Businesses will face unexpected challenges. Opportunities will disappear. Markets will change. Relationships will experience conflict. Your plans will sometimes collapse despite your best preparation. You cannot eliminate all of these experiences, but you can train your mind to respond differently. You can choose to ask what is possible instead of repeatedly asking why something went wrong. You can choose to search for the next step instead of becoming trapped by the size of the problem. Remember the 17 principles we explored. Separate problems from your identity. Replace unproductive questions with constructive ones. Focus on what you can control. Separate facts from assumptions. Break overwhelming problems into smaller pieces. Slow down before making important decisions. Ask what difficulties can teach you. Search for opportunities inside disruption. Build systems that prevent recurring problems. Prioritize based on impact rather than emotion. Choose the simplest effective solution. Take the next useful action instead of waiting for perfect certainty. Search for possibilities before limitations. Become emotionally disciplined. Ask better questions. Expect obstacles. And finally, become the person others can trust when problems appear. These principles are not meant to be memorized and forgotten. They are meant to become habits. The next time something goes wrong, pause before reacting. Ask yourself what you know for certain. Identify what you can control. Define the real problem. Break it into smaller pieces. Determine what matters most. Then ask one final question. What is the next useful action I can take? You may not solve everything immediately, but you will have moved from emotional reaction toward constructive action. That movement is where progress begins. Think about the people who inspire you most. They are rarely people who have never experienced problems. They are usually people who have experienced enormous problems and somehow continued moving forward. Their strength came from their response. They learned from failure instead of becoming defined by it. They adapted when circumstances changed. They remained curious when others became cynical. They focused on possibilities when others focused only on limitations. They did not always know the answer, but they were willing to search for it. Your mind can become trained in exactly the same way. Every problem is an opportunity to practice clearer thinking. Every setback gives you a chance to practice emotional discipline. Every mistake gives you an opportunity to improve a system. Every difficult decision gives you a chance to strengthen judgment. Every unexpected obstacle gives you another opportunity to become more adaptable. Over time, These experiences build something extremely valuable, a mind that does not immediately collapse when life becomes difficult. Thank you for listening to From Audiobooks and investing your time in strengthening your mindset, improving your decision-making, and learning how to focus on solutions instead of problems. If this audiobook gave you a new perspective, make sure to subscribe to From Audiobooks. Like this video, share it with your friends, family, colleagues, entrepreneurs, students, and anyone who may benefit from developing a stronger solution-focused mindset. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Tell us about one problem you are facing right now and, more importantly, tell us what solution-focused action you are going to take next. Your comment may inspire someone else who is facing a similar challenge. And your experience could become the encouragement another listener needs to stop focusing on the problem and start searching for the answer. If you found this audiobook valuable, share it with someone who spends too much time worrying about problems and needs a reminder that every difficult situation can be approached one step at a time. Your like helps YouTube recommend this audiobook to more people who are looking for personal development, mindset training, productivity, success, emotional strength, and practical wisdom. Your subscription helps From Audiobooks continue creating powerful educational content designed to help you become stronger, wiser, more disciplined, and more successful. And remember this final message: you may not control the problem, but you can control your response. You may not know the entire solution, but you can take the next step. You may not be able to change the past, but you can use its lessons to improve the future. You do not need to solve everything today. You simply need to refuse to stop searching for what you can do next. When others see obstacles, train yourself to search for possibilities. When others see failure, search for lessons. When others see uncertainty, search for information. When others see blame, search for responsibility. When others see complexity, search for simplicity. And when others ask, "Why is this happening to me?" train your mind to ask the question that changes everything: what can I do next? That is how you turn problems into progress, pressure into strength, uncertainty into opportunity, and challenges into a better future. Until our next audiobook, stay calm, think clearly, focus on what you can control, keep learning, keep moving forward, and never allow a problem to become bigger than your ability to search for a solution.